Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the CyberGizmo, we're going to be looking at protecting your data in 2020, right after this. This one is not going to be an easy topic to talk about, but in 2020, there are so many ways that you can expose your data to unintentional places that I've been watching a number of videos and looking at a number of suggestions that people are having, and I can see there's clear confusion in this area. And so I wanted to add my 2 cents, and I hope you will as well in the comments below. I think the first place we probably should start is we need a little understanding of InfoSec to begin with, info or information security. That is the practice of protecting information by mitigating risks. It's part of risk management and has been around for probably over 30 years at least. But that is to prevent or reduce unauthorized access to information to sources that you did not intend to release it to. And InfoSec is a balancing act. There are 3 legs to the stool. That stool is known as the CIA, yes, Central Intelligence Agency's triad. And those 3 legs are availability of information, how confidential the information is, and the integrity. Did the information get changed anywhere along the path? And those 3 legs are really the things that make up information security. And you really need to, I could spend probably 2 or 3 hours on that topic alone, but I will put some links below that you can go and read about information security yourself on how the risks, it's really an exercise in identifying where the risks are, and then identifying how to mitigate or how to minimize your exposure to those risks. That's really the central tenet of information security, at least in my opinion. So I think the rationale behind wanting to do this video today is that we're not customers of the cloud providers anymore. And we haven't been for some time, actually. We're the product. We're the product that the cloud sells to their customers, and usually those are ad agencies or their customers that need the data that we are freely providing without our consent. So in the past, we used to store the data locally on our machines. We would shop locally. We probably, even before computers, we probably just put it in a file cabinet someplace, and the only place, or in a bank vault. So the only places that information was available was in the local stores of our homes or in our banks. But today we store all that information in the cloud. And some of the information we didn't intend to go to the cloud, and it does. We purchase our products in the cloud, and we use plastic, or we use pay services to purchase those products. All of those leave signatures and footprints in tracking what we do and what we buy, even what we're interested in. Everything we click on, even the time that you spend on a web page is recorded. If you have IoT devices, anything you set up in that IoT device is communicated, and there's information being sent by those IoT devices that you don't even have any control over. So, and also our cell phones, because they're using GPS or they're using the cell phone towers or tracking you as you move. So, yeah, those are very concerning, at least to me. I don't know about you, but so let's. I think probably the most interesting thing is what Bruce Schneier said. He said that really there's no such thing as security in the abstract. Security can only be defined in relationship to something else. In other words, you have to have. If all you're looking at is security alone and you have no basis from which to compare against, how do you know you're secure? And he defined a term, and this was an article that he republished recently on his website called Schneier Security. if you're interested in that, I'll put it and the link in that below. But he was going back on what he said 10 years ago and kind of comparing to the predictions that he made then to now, and it's shocking how accurate he really was. But he came up with this term called deperimeterization, which is the dissolution of the boundary between the internal and the external network. It used to be that, what he was referring to there is it used to be that the corporations, would erect these elaborate barriers between their internal networks and the external network, but those boundaries have now blurred. They're pushing stuff out to the cloud. They're moving their businesses to the cloud. They're collecting a lot more information than they could physically store on premise. And so those boundaries between the internal and external have really blurred. He also goes on to talk about that VPNs are so full of holes that they might as well not even be there, and that is so true. The virtual private network is just not. It's not really a viable way of protecting information. It never was really intended for that. A VPN was really intended to allow external business customers or business employees to access resources on an internal network. That's really what its intent was originally. Consumer devices, he said in that article, will become trendier, cheaper, and more integrated, meaning that more integrated with the businesses and the business side of things in order to collect information about us. So, yeah, pretty shocking for an article written in 2010. The Internet of Things, now you don't even have to visit a website or even log on to your phone. I mean, the IoT constantly communicates directly to the companies that sell the devices. And they, in turn, take that data, aggregate it, and sell it to somebody else. You have no control over what those IoT devices are sending. Absolutely none. I mean, think about it. A light switch that's an IoT device will know that you're home. It'll know how long you're in a certain room. Based on the proximity of other IoT devices in that room, it may even also know how long you're watching TV or even what channels on the TV you're watching. So, or what music you're listening to. It's just 1984, and it's really scary to me. Anyway, that's just my opinion. So the security in 2020. The security trends for today, our businesses have shifted from protecting themselves from the bad guys to protecting themselves from us, the end users. We're not the end users anymore. We're just the product in their data stream. So they're collecting data without our consent. They're not doing things in our best interest. Duh, right? They're doing things to make themselves money. So in other words, the threat to their business model is not the bad guy, it's us. If we turn off the data spigot, they're threatened. And that is a problem, and that becomes, of course, a threat to their business. And they have been busy, they being the businesses that collect this type of information and rely on it, and trying to thwart even the privacy settings that we set up. You can't always rely on those privacy settings that we enable on their sites to do any good. And we saw that recently with some of the things that Facebook has been doing, for an example, in order to bypass the security settings that you put down, and they're still collecting the data anyway and sending it on. So you can't trust them to manage your security privacy. So I guess the question comes down to this is more of what to do for the paranoid, right? For us that are paranoid and Luddites. So what do we do? Since we're the product, what can we do to try to stem some of this? Well, the first thing that I would do, and I would advise, is get off of the proprietary operating systems and get onto ones that are open source, like Linux, for example. Operating systems like the Mac OS or Mac OS 10 or Windows, they're all commercial, and they're owned by companies that are large data collectors. That includes iOS and Android too, by the way, in that. All of those operating systems are designed to collect data about you and to resell it, or even for their own internal uses. So And those are the greatest sources. Those operating systems are one of the greatest sources for information abuse or InfoSec abuse. So that's the first security risk that I would identify is the operating system that you're on. So second is don't buy IoT devices, and that's going to be really difficult to do because that functionality is being built into everything today, from your stove to your refrigerator to your car. All of that information is being built in, and they are transmitting wirelessly. Even your home security systems are part of the IoT network. So, yeah, that's going to be a difficult one to do. So, the other one is the other suggestion I would have would be to use OTR, off the record messaging. There's some examples. These are not recommendations. I'm just telling you some examples that are out there. There's Adium for the Mac, and there is Pigeon that has an OTR plugin for both Windows and Linux. There are other messaging tools that are InfoSec compliant and are very good, but they really prevent they are encrypted, they prevent any kind of leakage of the information being sent. The other source of data leakage that I don't have on here is your email server. So if your email is being sent to, say, one of the commercial providers, then that email can be viewed by them, and they can learn things about you, about what you purchased. If you get a receipt back from the online web store, they know what you have purchased and they know when. If it's something you buy frequently, they'll learn that too. They'll learn that quite frequently as well. Medical devices are also becoming IoT devices, and they are transmitting information, including a watch that monitors your heart and maybe even your O2 level in your blood could be done as well. So, yeah, those kind of things are frightening at best. So what can we do? Well, first, don't install data, photos, personal videos in the cloud. Put them back on your home server and use those. As far as your email accounts are concerned, there are a number of providers that now you have to trust. You can, if you don't trust anyone, you could also host your own email server, but be aware that that makes you vulnerable to attacks. Email is one of those things where in the past it has been very difficult to keep secure, and that's why most people elect not to host their own email servers. It is not an easy task to keep up with the number of vulnerabilities in the email servers. And I don't care which one you pick, they've all had issues in the past and will probably continue to. Anytime you're moving, the other thing to remember about email is that it is unencrypted as it's going through the network. Even if the only way to make sure, even if you encrypt the message itself, the metadata that's in the header and the subject line, those are sent unencrypted. So more can be learned, as we know, that from the metadata than from the message itself. So just be aware of that. But some of the ways that you might mitigate the cloud service is install your own. And there's a number of them. There's Nextcloud, there's OwnCloud. You could even install a NAS or FreeNAS or any of those things to store your files locally. Don't keep them in the cloud. Make sure that your phone is set to send as little data as possible. Now, there are videos on that topic for your particular device, whether it be an iOS or an Android or whether it's any of those kinds of devices. There are videos on YouTube, probably in the hundreds, that will talk about what settings to turn on depending upon what version you're running. I have seen personally with a number of things that those settings do not necessarily survive when you move to a new version of the OS. I have seen them reset, so be aware of that. Make sure your online accounts are set up to send as little data as possible. And I noticed recently on one of my online accounts, I won't pick on anybody in particular, but settings I had turned on, I started getting questions from that particular business asking me if I wanted this feature, and then reading closer into what it was actually a feature that would disable some of the security settings. So pretty sneaky, which is why I would tend to not want to use those kinds of services. And the other one is you could install what we used to call a reverse firewall, but I can tell you that those are painful to deal with. Those only send packets and protocols that you authorize. So basically, if you remember back in the old days when I think it was Windows Firewall originally, it was a reverse firewall as well as a inbound firewall. And every time you went, I think it showed up in Vista, every time you made a connection, it would say, do you want to make this connection, yes or no? And then it would open a rule for that firewall. So yeah, they're a real pain to work with. So, but they will protect you somewhat. They will not protect you against web services, however, because web services use the same ports as your browser does. So they also don't really do a good job of supporting with TLS or SSL connections as well. So because a reverse firewall has to be able to read the data packet. So that's not a really great option either. The best option is just get off those services and try to get off of operating systems that are tracking. So the other thing is that there's also, you can configure Firefox. There's also ClickZ, which is a variant of Firefox. I still need to do a review on that, and I'll probably do that sometime in the future, but I'm still working with it and trying to understand, is it as secure as they say it is, and how secure really is it? That one allegedly has the rules for the GDPR for Europe. It was designed in Europe to support the privacy rules in the GDPR. What about using a VPN? VPN won't protect your information. What about Tor? Tor is not going to protect your information either. If you're sending information through Tor or VPN, it's going to pop out on the other end somewhere, and then it's going to be visible. What about a proxy? A proxy won't protect your information either. So, I mean, I saw some of this about, protect your data, use a VPN. Well, a VPN will protect you up to the point of your VPN provider, and it encrypts the data in flight, which is fine. But it doesn't protect the data in flight once it leaves the VPN provider. And Tor is the same thing. It protects those are really devices that are meant to try to protect your who you are as you're using the system, but it doesn't protect the information that you're sending. So what about whole disk encryption? Well, whole disk encryption is very good, but it's very good when the machine is off or it's hibernating. Once the machine is on, the services that are inside of the decryption mechanism are, when you request a file, it begins to decrypt that file for you to use. So it's kind of, so it's kind of good and it's kind of not good, because if you're up, any application that's running under your login can access the data freely. So I would not count on whole disk encryption as a way to secure your data alone. It's a good way to protect it when the machine is off or hibernating, because it requires the key in order to unlock the encryption sequence. I think I've talked about that a little bit before. So what else can you do? Well, I mean, if you use whole disk encryption, turn your machine off or put it in hibernation mode if it's not in use, because that resets the whole disk encryption key back. It turns it off and uninstalls it out of memory, and then resets the key. So the next time, you have to recalculate again to get it back. So cell phones should be turned off, but they really can't be unless they have a feature that physically disconnects the battery. So, and that's one of my big concerns with cell phones, is that you can never trust them to truly be off. Don't use public cloud servers to host and store your data. They're giving those services for a reason, for free. And how they make their money is off of selling what you tell them. So just be aware of that. Encryption is probably the best way to protect your data. And the data must be encrypted and remain encrypted even when it's stored externally. So if you are sending the data to the cloud, make sure it's encrypted so it cannot be read. And don't use their keys, because if you're using their keys, they can open it. Data, and also remember that data in flight has to be encrypted. So if this is the tenets of InfoSec. Data at rest is encrypted. Data in flight, that is transferring over a network, is encrypted. use TLS or SSL, TLS, but make sure that that data is encrypted before you send. Only unencrypt the data when it's local to your machine. Don't encrypt it on the cloud because then the data is available to them. That should be common sense, right? But I'm sure, anyway. If they have to put warnings on batteries so you don't drink the battery acid, you probably need to put warnings on this, not to unencrypt your data on a public server. And only unencrypt it for the duration of its use. So once you're done with the data, re-encrypt it, and you're done. You're back on disk again. So that's the reason for the data at rest, data in flight, is you encrypt it only during the time frame that it's in use. And remember, it's vulnerable when it's unencrypted. If you have if you have systems which are, monitoring on your device, on Windows, for example, or Mac OS, or even Linux, if you have something that's monitoring, it'll see that data as well as unencrypted. Encryption products that I consider are good ones are the open source ones. There are a number that are closed source, but I can't recommend those because I prefer open source where we can see the source code of the system and know what it's actually doing. GNU Privacy Guard is very good. OpenPG is the open source version of that. It takes a little while to understand how it's working, but it has some very good encryption protocols in it. It is supported on Windows. It runs on Mac, and there's also versions, of course, for Linux, and then also for Android. I'm not aware of any on iOS yet, but I'm sure if maybe one of you know. You can post a link below, but I'm not aware of any on iOS. Also, VeraCrypt is open source. VeraCrypt allows you to encrypt files or directories, or you can set up an encryption store and then push files into it. It's very good. It's also open source, and it's been around. It used to be called TrueCrypt. It runs on Windows, Mac, and also Linux as well. There is a hidden mode in there. I think that was supposed to be designed so that you can turn it on optionally, but it won't show up in the directory. But trust me, if you search hard enough, you can find it. You can find where it's storing things. So I wouldn't rely on that if you're trying to hide stuff on your disk. You may be hiding it so well you may not be able to find it. But yeah, those two products I recommend. I've used both of them. They work quite well. So I hope you let me put this back over here. I hope you enjoyed this today. It was just a short video to talk a little bit about information security. I don't really want to get into the depths of information security. That is a classroom level course, and we could be here for several weeks understanding it. The real chore in information security is identifying the risk. The mitigation part is the easy part. It's identifying the risks and where your vulnerabilities are. So if you take a look at the kinds of data that you keep, the kinds of data that you want to protect, you might classify it into typically in information sec, they classify it into 3 or more categories. There is information that is open, that is stuff that you can freely share. There is information that is confidential. It's information about yourself that you would only like to share with a few friends, maybe a few relatives, but you don't really want it to go beyond that bound. And then there is private information, which is stuff you'd never share. That would be things like your social security number and your date of birth and all that kind of stuff. The kinds of information, maybe your financial records as well. But that would be information that you would not want to share at all. So typically that's kind of the way it goes. There are more categories than 3, but typically 3 is all you need for a person. But you may feel differently, and you may feel that you need additional ones. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this today. And as always, please like and subscribe. Hope to see you all again real soon, and bye for now.